During the programme, you'll notice one or two interesting variation of fiddle yards. This is Barry Norman's version on his layout, Windlesham Cove. Like Mike Hayward's Chesil Bay, Windlesham Cove is also a portable layout and is well known on the exhibition circuit. Again, it's based on Southern Railway practice and is built to 4mm scale, running on EM gauge, that's 18.2mm track.
Leaving Waterloo Station about 60 years ago, changing trains at Bournemouth, you might eventually arrive at a small seaside town for your holiday like Windlesham Cove. Windlesham Cove aimed to be one of those typical southern stations at the end of a long winding branch line that led down to the sea. Unfortunately, when I started looking at the different branches like Lyme Regis, Swanage, Seaton, Sidmouth, they're all quite different, all quite unique, so it wasn't really possible to build a typical station, so I selected the Swanage branch to build my model. Really, the whole station is a mixture of the two stations on the Swanage branch, Swanage itself and Cove Castle. The station building here is a model of the one at Cove Castle, very similar, slightly altered to fit into the arrangement here, whereas the engine shed, water tower arrangement at the other end is based upon that at Axminster, although not built in the brick that the Axminster one was, but in the local Purbeck stone of the Swanage area. Quite an unusual arrangement, with the engine shed running off the turntable, with the water tower and coaling stage just in front of it. The goods shed arrangement is virtually a copy of the shed at Cove Castle, with a small cattle dock at the side, the typical goods shed, with this ivy growing up the side that was very typical of photographs of the shed throughout the 1930s and 40s. The station area has been built up as a group. At the front, the station buildings with a canopy, and you might notice that the whole building is painted in the style of the London South Western Railway, which would have built the branch line. This setting is in the early 1920s, just as the London South Western Railway became the Southern Railway. So the buildings are still in the livery of the London South Western Railway, whereas the locomotives, carriages are those of the Southern Railway. And as you notice, the canopy, though every individual piece of wood is painted a slightly different shade, little detail that made things look a bit more interesting. To finish the scene, there was a background of trees here. I tried to make the trees copy of real ones. Some are oak, some are ash. There's one or two silver birches at the other end, but it's to give a backcloth to the whole general area. In front of the station area, contrasting with the station building, is the brick-built office with the coal staith just outside where the local coalman would have unloaded his coal and taken it to the inhabitants in the town. Again, it's another group here. The Foden steam wagon, introduced into the 1920s, will be taking parcels, crates off to shops, perhaps factories in the area. Up at the other end, there's two road bridges. One of them comes from Swanage, that was positioned at the station just behind the goods shed originally, and the other one comes from miles away in Cornwall. As the line continues through the road bridge, you come upon the level crossing. There's a pair of typical London South Western Railway gates, and the signal box that controls them comes from Wiltshire. Being a Southern Railway branch line, it's not surprising that most of the engines come from that company or the original London South Western Railway. We have the BT well tank, an engine built originally in the 1860s but rebuilt many times over the coming years, and they mainly worked in Cornwall, so it's a bit out of place here. We have a Great Western engine over there, a metro tank, called a metro tank because it ran mainly in the metropolitan areas of London, but were seen in later years out on branch lines. It's not really very common for Great Western trains to run into southern stations. It seems to be a model maker's dream, really. With a couple more southern engines here, a Jubilee class tender engine, called a Jubilee because it was introduced in the Jubilee year of Queen Victoria. And the last engine, the Adams radial tank, originally would have run in London, but in later years progressed into the branch lines and became very well known for running on the Lyme Regis branch in Dorset. Windlesham Cove was started a number of years ago, and gradually, of course, over the years, ideas develop, new things come along, new ideas, and I felt it was time to start on something new. And this is Petherick. It's a landscape, the idea being of a station set in its natural surroundings with rising hills, bridges, cornfields, making it look as real as possible, losing the outside edge of the baseboard, but making it feel absolutely real. It obviously uses the techniques that I've used before, but they've been extended, developed, hopefully improved upon as the years have gone by. There's still much detail to put on this model that make it far more interesting, areas of interest, small bits of detail, and of course one of the main areas are trees.
Barry Norman touched on the subject of trees, and in a little while we shall have a look at Shirley Rowe actually making trees. But before that, let's have a look at another way of making an interesting and colourful background to layouts. Shirley's husband Dave has a great passion for scenic modelling as a setting for his trams and narrow gauge lines. Dave and Shirley work closely as a team on their dioramas, and both have a very keen eye for detail, which probably accounts for the tremendous interest their models create wherever they are seen. Axford has taken Dave 3 years and 5,000 hours of skilled work to create. I first met Dave at an exhibition, and it's obvious that he's a man of infinite care and patience. Just look at the detail here. It's so fine, it's unbelievable. Dave admits that sometimes he even has to use his own hair as a modelling medium because it is just the right scale.
What I like to see in a model is not just the railway, but also the community that it serves. And here I've taken a variety of buildings from various locations in East Devon and assembled them into one composite town through which the River Axe runs in the far corner, and hence the name Axford. Around this part of the world we have Axminster and Axmouth, and now to that I've added this town of Axford. Over here, a whole row of shops from Honiton High Street, all the interiors of the shops being modelled in great detail. Over in the corner behind the street market scene, I've taken shops from Sidmouth, while on this side of the road is a completely different section of Ottery St Mary. Here in the backyard of this shop we have the handcart belonging to the local chimney sweep, and in it you can see some of his spare sweeping rods. He's not visible, he's inside the shop, but if you look at the chimney here you'll see his brush emerge as he does his work. Over here I have put the street market, which takes place on Thursdays in Axminster, copying each stall, even to the extent of reproducing the vegetables and fruit in the exact positions that they have them on their stalls. Trams run down the length of the high street to give added interest, while trains run along the front here. The school here is a little village school to the north-east of Honiton, and this was about the most difficult building of all. About 250 hours in this building. There's a basic plywood base with plastic sheeting cut out to form the walls, and to that I've applied modelling clay, which is marked up into the shapes of these various stones. The area down here has a little coaling stage and a group of workmen who are busily engaged in some problem, while next door is the station master's new bicycle. This comes complete with bell, brake levers, reflector, pump, and even to spokes which I've formed from my own hair, gluing them in place.
The trees which I make are made from this steel cable which is available from garages. It consists of 6 main strands which have to be untwined, and then each of the 6 consists of 20 smaller strands which again have to be untwined using pliers because the cable's very, very stiff. Big divisions represent the branches, and then the smaller divisions represent the twigs, which have to be cut at varying lengths to give a more realistic appearance. When the whole bundle has been untwined, it appears something like this one, and at this stage it has to be coated with a mixture of plaster and powder paint. The powder paint is added to the plaster so that if the tree gets chipped at any time, it doesn't show as glaring white, but it comes through as a browny grey colour. This is applied fairly liberally to cover all the twists of the wire, and of course that takes quite a while to dry, but when it dries it appears something like this one, bark, or it can be left as this one is for a rough bark, and when that's done it has to be painted. This was sprayed with a grey-green oil paint, and then the foliage has to be applied. The foliage is sold in a mat which is quite solid, and this has to be teased out as finely as possible to give the leaves the natural light, airy appearance that they have. And the pieces are just draped on the end of the twigs, secured with a little wood glue. And the finished tree appears something like these.
There's a tendency amongst all of us to make our trees far too small for our layout. You don't realize it, but a tree, a pine or an oak, for a 4mm scale layout has to be 12 inches. That's nearly 30 centimeters in height. Much, much bigger than you think. And coming back to layouts, Martin Brent has some very positive ideas of how to build them.
My model of Rye Harbour is based very much on the East Sussex scene. I've stretched the area perhaps a bit to take in a bit of the coastline around Rye, and I've built a railway that runs from Rye down to the sea. In fact, it bears little or no relationship to the real area, but in the model I've incorporated several features from perhaps my past or that are personal to me, things that I remember. In the harbour area there are some net sheds that the fishermen used to hang their nets to dry in before the days of man-made materials. There's a little boatyard that I used to have to visit in the course of my job. I had to have a pub on the layout, but the actual area available was rather small. Eventually, I used my mother's house as a basis for the model, but called it after the pub that I used to regard as my local. This type of thing gives a layout life, and makes it more interesting. There's more to a model than just the actual railway. There's the landscape around it. One of the things I do feel is that you should be able to look at a station, a model of a station with no trains there, and be able to say, that's Sussex, or that's Devon, or you should be able to place the model by its surroundings. If you're going to build buildings that look like the real thing, then you can't just get a sheet of card and start cutting. You've got to look at the real houses, the stations, and find out how they were built, and base your models on prototypes. It's all too easy to build a house from your imagination and then find that it is completely impossible and it looks wrong. All of the structures on my layouts are based on prototypes from East Sussex. When I go around the country, I take a camera with me, and perhaps a sketch pad as well. If I see a building I like, I'll stop, take a couple of photographs and store it away for a rainy day, and then when I'm building a layout, perhaps I might be able to incorporate either a complete building or some features of a building. It's the actual enjoyment you get from creating something that is very personal. I've incorporated in my model of Rye Harbour a lot of personal touches. Perhaps a touch of vanity is the photographer by the level crossing, which is meant to be me, because around the time of the model I was in that part of the country photographing railways for all I was worth, because they were going to disappear. And it was something that I was going to miss.